This is BBC Two with an elegant and sophisticated mode of transport.
If you owned a Rolls-Royce Silver Cloud in the middle 50s, you were someone special. It cost £5,000, which also bought a 12-bedroomed house in Surrey's stockbroker belt or 10 Morris Minors. It was an absolute fortune. But then the Cloud was intended for a different world, a world of old money, when everything was safe, solid, and unquestionable. Thank you, William. But in 1955, when the Silver Cloud was launched, the world was changing fast. The lower orders would no longer doff their caps and cry, "God bless the squire and his relations and keep us in our proper stations." There were dark clouds on the horizon, and they were the gathering storms of democracy. But the Silver Cloud survived the social upheaval of the 60s and 70s and stands today as a glorious monument, a sculptured creation to a lost world of breeding and privilege. It reminds us of the way we were.
This was an era of elegance, taffeta and plummy accents. Pedigree was paramount and gently bred girls curtsied into high society as debutantes. A monarch among motor cars, the Silver Cloud was a transport of delight, a fairy tale carriage stately enough even for Grace Kelly and Prince Rainier. Each Cloud took 3 months to build, weighed 2 tons and had 12 coats of paint. Behind that regal radiator slumbered softly spoken 4.9 straight 6 or 6.2-litre V8 engines, the power output of which was never declared by Rolls-Royce, but merely described as sufficient. A mighty girder chassis supported that statuesque body. It was the nearest thing you could get to a country house on wheels.
Externally, the Silver Cloud really will be one of the all-time classics. You can walk right round a Silver Cloud, and I can guarantee there won't be anything which offends your eye. It was styled quite simply to look like a stately home. It had a presence and style, and at the same time, it had to pay more than a passing nod to modern requirements of fuel efficiency, if you like. It does flow a lot more than its predecessor did.
It's like an animal in a way, but it's sculptured out of shape. You could imagine its power by the angle of the screen or the backlight or the general attitude of the waist rail and the wings. You could see it. It was an integrated mobile object.
But it was an object that couldn't afford to have a single chink in its armour. For the Rolls-Royce owner, it would be a tragedy of biblical proportions if the best car in the world were to ever break down. At the very worst, it would merely fail to proceed. They were tested with brutality to absolute destruction.
But the Silver Cloud's interior is perhaps its most magnificent asset. Padded and panelled with fin de siècle elegance and secured by only the very finest Yale door locks, this is a throne room. There were 56 yards of leather piping, 3 entire cowhides, 12 square foot of timber, and the factory always kept a sample of the wood, just in case the car ever had an accident so they could match it up perfectly. And if you specified the air conditioning at £577, it pumped out the equivalent of 50 domestic refrigerators. So we're not talking about the interior of a mere motor car, we're talking a haven of peace in a wild and whirling world.
For the owners of Blackpool Pleasure Beach, there is only one way to escape the helter-skelter of modern life.
The great thing of driving a car like this, or even being a passenger in it, is the sheer sort of smell and feel of quality. That you know this car is not going to end up on a scrap heap like some other cars you might drive. It's got a sort of feeling of almost being perpetual and lasting forever about it. It looks more like a Rolls-Royce than modern ones in a way.
Well, it does. The modern ones look far more ordinary, although I think they've got a very nice shape, but they're not regal looking like this.
I think it's the most romantic car that you can have. You can't have anything more romantic or more beautiful or more impressive if you wish to impress people. And of course we all want to be impressive one way or another. And you feel impressive in it, you feel, you know, you're being taken over the clouds, and it's very, very grand to be in a Rolls.
So grand that not only did you own a silver cloud, you owned the road as well.
Off! Oh, you stupid old buzzard!
But for those who really wanted to be remembered, the Cloud's separate chassis meant you could specify your own coachwork. Some were quite happy looking, others, like this Hooper-bodied limousine, were not.
But for those who didn't want to be remembered, who thought the Cloud's imposing architecture was just a teeny bit flamboyant, there was this, the slightly more discreet Bentley S-Series. At 100 quid less than the Cloud, it was identical, apart from this round-shouldered radiator, different badges on the hubcaps, gauges, and pedals. But even the Bentley's self-conscious restraint couldn't protect it from a changing society. The best cars in the world drove smack into a new social order.
Baby, you can drive my car. Yes, I'm gonna be a star. Baby, you can drive my car. And maybe I love you. Beep, 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 yeah.
Very funny about being here at St George's Hill, because that's where I bought my first Rolls-Royce, and it was a Cloud 3, like this lovely lady, and I bought it off Tom Jones. It was a silver car with black windows. I mean, quite flash when you come to think of it. And they were wonderful cars to arrive in. They were a bugger to drive.
I think that celebrities buying Rolls-Royces in the 50s gave Rolls-Royce heart attacks because they wanted them to be establishment cars, and that we upstarts should be driving around in them. I mean, so when my good friend, God rest his soul, John Lennon, decided to do his Rolls-Royce psychedelic, I mean, that was the end. I mean, you know, Britain was going to sink into the sea after that.
But everyone thought, yeah, that's Lennon. That's him showing, like, up yours.
The Newman that came along, we were all upstarts, but we didn't mind, because if an upstart felt good riding about in a Rolls-Royce, then tough. So it was the marrying of the old and the new. And I don't think we've let the side down particularly.
But old and new made unhappy bedfellows, and the Silver Cloud changed Rolls-Royce's image forever. A gentrified carriage for the privileged few became a bit of flash for a lot of cash. The Cloud didn't change, the people who drove it did.
To me, thank God, all life has been fun. And this car of mine in the late 50s was also fun, but it was the time before envy and jealousy. So if you went to the pictures in one of these, when you came out, all you'd get is an admiring crowd.
I think there was envy years ago, because I can remember going back to school in the Rolls through Scotland Road, Liverpool, and one didn't like stopping at a red traffic light. I mean, you know, there was some nasty, fairly nasty remarks, and you know, people throwing odd brick at a Rolls in Liverpool in those days.
Yes.
And these four guys walked across, looked at the Rolls, looked at me, grinning at them, and one of them said to me, "It's all right for you, golden balls," and walked off. And I sold it the next week. That's when I got rid of them.
Rolls resorted to some desperately needed PR.
The image of the Silver Cloud had always been pretty high, and to promote that image, the company sought a way of doing it, and they felt the way was to find someone to road test the car and to put it through its paces and hopefully say all the right things about it. And Tony Brooks, a motor racing driver at the time, was chosen, and he did say some very complimentary remarks about the Silver Cloud 3, and it made people realise that although it was a very large car, it could be hustled around corners much better than people imagined.
They scored a marketing coup by taking the unprecedented step of driving a Cloud flat out around Europe, instantly blessing it with performance and agility.
Nobody could look at that brochure without being fascinated. You followed him through France, along the Corniche, and it made you want to buy a Rolls-Royce. And although the company's fame is undisputed, you still have to nudge people along. This publication landed on every managing director's desk with a turnover of a given sum. And one of the desks it landed on was Sir William Lowndes, who was the boss man of Jaguar, and his reaction was, "Why didn't we do this?"
But the Cloud was aging fast, and by '64, sales had slipped into a genteel decline. It was replaced in '65 by the new age Silver Shadow. Traditionalists winced at its Hillman Hunter-like styling, but it boasted thoroughly modern, independent, self-leveling suspension. The Shadow went on to become the best-selling and most profitable Rolls-Royce ever, leaving the Cloud looking and feeling like a prodigious antique. It fell rapidly from grace into the carriage trade, stripped of its haughty Edwardian dignity. Decked with ribbons and carnations, they were harnessed into service as whitewashed wedding workhorses. How the mighty have fallen. But Rollses weren't always white. When the Queen of Romance ordered hers from London Rolls-Royce dealer Jack Barclay, she started a trend.
So I said to Jack Barclay, "I want a white Rolls." "White Rolls?" he said. "Nobody's ever had a white Rolls." So I said, "I want a white Rolls." So he made an awful scene and fuss, and I said, "All right, if you don't want to make it, don't bother." And you know, he did want to make it, and he made it. And of course, it was an absolute sensation wherever it appeared. And of course, people were always borrowing it from it to manage it because it was white, and they wanted to have a lovely car to go away in.
Gone were those aristocratic first owners with their Rolls-Royce trained chauffeurs and heated motor houses. No longer maintained in the manner to which it had become accustomed, the Cloud found that rust is no respecter of pedigree. The 70s were its darkest hour.
In the 80s, enthusiasts reckoned that the Cloud really did have a silver lining, and prices started to move up fast. They homed in on £50,000, and then the market crashed. Today they've slipped back, but only perhaps to about 30 grand. People look at the Cloud today and think, well, £30,000 for this, or a BMW, or a Mercedes, and then they go back to the Cloud and they think, well, there is nothing at all on the road today that has this sort of class.
And if the standard-bodied cars weren't classy enough, you could opt for a cool Continental. The Cloud and S-Series Bentleys were the last crew products to be available with special coach-built bodywork. These days, a Cloud 3 Continental like this can fetch a hefty £60,000. But perhaps one of the prettiest examples of the coach builder's craft is this Bentley S1 Continental convertible with bodywork by Park Ward. One of only a handful made, it cost $7,500 in 1958 and now commands the thick end of 70 grand.
Well, I have to say that it's a car I drive every day, and that was a very important factor when I bought it. I wanted something I could actually use as a proper car, and not have in a garage and just treat on, you know, have on weekends and all that kind of stuff. So it was essential that I had a car that was going to work for me.
Of all the Rolls-Royces, why choose a Cloud?
Because it's got gravitas, it's got weight. Shadows are fine, they're lovely, good price, good value. Spirits are ugly, I think. You may as well have a Granada. But this has just got a lot of weight built into it. It's got dignity and manners and all those kind of things. You know, it's more like your auntie. The other cars are more like mistresses, I think.
Even I had one, a Bentley S2 bought from a bankruptcy auction in Market Harborough for the princely sum of £4,000. Now the plan was to keep the car for a couple of weeks and sell it on for £5,000 and have a good old tickle. But I actually kept that car for 6 months simply because it was hard to part with so much. I adored its lofty, imperial driving position and the way you could literally hear the clock ticking at 60 miles an hour. Only trouble was the old Duchess wouldn't be hurried, and if you buried the accelerator all the way down to the Wilton carpeting, you would lurch round corners with cinematic tyre squeal, leaving an untidy heap of passengers on the rear floor. But the really reprehensible pleasure about driving one of these cars is the way that the traffic just moves over as though you were a head of state or an ambulance. Get out of my way, I'm coming through.
These particular cars are the last of the real Rolls-Royces. They are in fact the majestic car of the Rolls-Royce range.
You see that seam there, that line that's running down there? I mean, a panel beater's nightmare, I would imagine. But it just gives it an elegance that you can't buy. I mean, that means nothing to you. And it might get me in Sude's corner and, you know, all the rest of it. But I just think it's delicious.
I don't look upon myself as an owner of this car. I look upon myself merely as a temporary custodian of it. I feel I have a responsibility to look after it.
They always had an elegance that the other people didn't have. And it also stood for all the sort of history of England. It was part of England, you see, that you had a Rolls, because it was the greatest car in the world for anybody to possess.
I think the Rolls-Royce is the best car in the world because the whole mystique of it makes people think it's the best car in the world. And it probably is.
By the time the Silver Cloud was launched, the genteel society for which it was originally intended had ceased to exist. Traditional privilege had been replaced by hard-won gain, and it was one of the first Rolls-Royces that owners actually drove themselves. Today, it stands as a magnificent memorial to a forgotten world of servants, chauffeurs, and gracious living. We will never see its like again.
Burn some rubber with Top Gear Motorsport, Monday at 8 here on BBC Two.